individuals from the Attorney General's office, Melissa Palapoo, who is an Assistant Attorney General, as well as Danielle Hageman-Clark, who is the Criminal Bureau Chief. Thank you for joining us.
Push that button, Danielle. Okay.
And Ashley Steffen, the Legislative Liaison.
Everybody knows me. We're fine.
Good morning. Thank you for having us here. I'm Danielle Hageman-Clark, the Criminal Justice Bureau Chief, and we appreciate the opportunity to share with you our thoughts about these package.
And good morning, everyone. My name is Melissa Palapoo, and I'm an Assistant Attorney General with the Michigan Department of Attorney General, and I lead the Attorney General's Human Trafficking Initiative, as well as chair the Michigan Human Trafficking Commission. A little background on me: I was also a Wayne County prosecutor for a long time, focusing on child abuse crimes, and I also focus on child abuse crimes at the Attorney General's office as well. And I just say that because these bills really do also address child abuse crimes as well. Thank you for allowing me to be here today on behalf of the Department of Attorney General to lend our support for Senate Bills 520 to 524. Human trafficking continues to plague the most vulnerable among us. Human trafficking is a crime of exploitation, and using control and submission, traffickers exploit their victims, subjecting them to sexual, physical, and emotional abuse. Human trafficking, which includes both labor trafficking and sex trafficking, is a thriving enterprise in the world and in Michigan, making an estimated $254 billion a year in profits. And Michigan is no different. Human trafficking is an issue across Michigan. There is no place, no region that is immune to this crime. In fact, while statistics regarding human trafficking are not complete, the information we do have available shows that reports of human trafficking in 2024 rose, both nationwide and in the state of Michigan. In 2024, there were 340 cases confirmed in Michigan and 585 victims identified, and that's from the National Human Trafficking website, the hotline website that was operated by Polaris formerly. Michigan ranks incredibly high for the amount of cases and confirmed cases that happen nationwide. We fall only below states like Texas and California and Florida and New York. We continue to work with partners aiding human trafficking survivors from across the state and work with local law enforcement agencies, the Michigan State Police, Homeland Security Investigations, and the FBI on the prosecution side. Our office continues to lead the fight against trafficking through the AG's Human Trafficking Initiative. The office fights to hold traffickers accountable, prosecuting trafficking offenses, working on large investigations, as well as providing desperately needed training about human trafficking to the public and professionals, including healthcare workers, service providers, and law enforcement. Unfortunately, so much of the crime of trafficking is misunderstood by the public because people get their information from social media posts and movies that largely overlook or misunderstand the reality of what human trafficking really looks like. Trafficking is not the white vans abducting children. It is not always about violence, and it does not only involve sex. Victims are not just being targeted by strangers, and they are not just women or little girls, and they are not being held or being hid away behind locked doors. In fact, many times victims do not even realize that they are being trafficked, and that's largely because traffickers are using manipulation to exploit their victims. Traffickers are often somebody who has been trusted by the victim or gained their trust, and trafficking happens in plain sight and in legitimate businesses all over the state of Michigan. However, even with the work of the AG's Human Trafficking Initiative and all the undertakings we've done, in 2023, the state of Michigan still received the letter grade of an F from Shared Hope, which is a respected organization that rates and grades all of the states. This department believes that in order to eradicate human trafficking in Michigan, we must do the following. First, we must take a victim-centered approach and aim to provide survivors with legal protections, as well as the ability to heal and grow and become productive members of society. We do believe that the House package that is a companion package to this will address those. Second, we must strengthen our tools for prevention and increased accountability, which is what we believe the Senate bills will do. The proposed Senate bills are part of the solution, and we will hold traffickers accountable, showing victims and survivors that they can trust coming forward because their traffickers will be punished and will not just be released back to the streets and able for retribution or exploit more vulnerable people. Before specifically discussing the bills, I'd just like to give a brief overview of what proving human trafficking in Michigan requires, so that when we're thinking about these bills, we know what is actually required for the elements of human trafficking. So in Michigan, human trafficking requires not only that you have trafficked this person by obtaining or transporting or recruiting or physically doing the act. You also have to have used force, fraud, or coercion in completing that task. So human trafficking requires the use of force, fraud, or coercion, with the one exception of human trafficking of a minor for commercial sex purposes only. So force, fraud, and coercion, they have legal definitions. And so it's not just the common idea of what we believe coercion is, or what we believe force is, or what we believe fraud is. Those are actually legally defined definitions that we have to prove in order to have human trafficking. So force would mean physical violence or the threat of physical violence, or actual restraint or confinement or threat of. That's what force means. Fraud means false or deceptive offers of employment or marriage. That's the definition of fraud for human trafficking. And coercion means threatening to harm or physically restrain, the creation of a scheme, plan, or pattern intended to cause an individual to believe that failure to comply would result in psychological, reputational, or financial harm to, or physical restraint of any individual. Also, the abuse of or threatening abuse of the legal system, like threatening to arrest an individual, threatening deportation. Knowingly destroying, concealing, removing, or confiscating, or taking away any identification, like immigration documents, passports, government identifications, and then controlling a person's access to controlled substance, whether that's an illegal controlled substance or something that's been prescribed to them. So these Senate bills will demonstrate that our commitment to the victims, and will show that we do not want traffickers in our state. And when we convict someone of trafficking another person, that we will hold them accountable. Senate Bill 520 will increase the penalties for human traffickers. It's going to amend MCL 750-462F by making the trafficking of adults a 20-year felony and a $20,000 fine. The original bill had human trafficking as a 10-year offense, or a $10,000 fine, meaning it was possible to just pay a $10,000 fine. This amendment will also eliminate the distinction between labor trafficking and commercial sex trafficking, creating equal penalties for both. The current bill had labor trafficking at the 10-year and commercial sex trafficking at a 15-year. This just makes it so everybody is treated the same in human trafficking. So if you traffic an individual, it's a 20-year offense. It will also increase the penalty for trafficking minors from a 20-year offense to a life offense. And it does not matter whether that is for commercial sex or for labor trafficking. Senate Bill 520 will change the sentencing grids for human trafficking offenses. I'm a prosecutor, so I use these terms all the time of sentencing guidelines and sentencing grids, and it gets very complicated and quite boring. But they kind of go hand in hand. So you change the tier, the level, the 20-year offense, the listed offense, but you also have to change the sentencing grid for what that offense means. The sentencing grids are what is used to determine the length of a sentence for someone who's convicted of a crime. The grids go from an A to an H, A grid being the highest grid, and H grid being the lowest grid. So if your crime is on an A grid, you are looking more at a prison sentence. If your crime is on an H grid, you're looking at probation or a fine. So currently, labor trafficking of adults is a D grid, which is quite low for trafficking of another individual. This will almost always result in a probationary sentence or a county jail sentence, but rarely prison unless the person has a prior conviction. The amendment will make it a B grid, which will result in prison. The amendment will also increase the grid for commercial sex trafficking adults from a C grid to a B grid, again, making sure that we're holding our traffickers accountable for the harm that they are causing to victims. It will increase the grid for purchasing commercial sex from a minor, which is not in the human trafficking statutes themselves, but they're in a separate group of what we used to call the prostitution statutes, but they're really the commercial sex statutes. And so there's another crime for when you purchase commercial sex from somebody who is under the age of 18. That used to be a 5-year offense. So you used to be able to purchase commercial sex from somebody who was 16 or 17 years old, and it was only a 5-year offense and on the E-grid. So you were just getting probation. So we're going to increase that to a 20-year offense and on the B-grid. This is consistent with already the child sexually abusive activity laws and with human trafficking. And we all know that if a child, and a 16-year-old and a 17-year-old is a child, if they are out on the streets and they are engaging in commercial sex, they are a victim of exploitation. They are a victim of coercion, and they are a victim of human trafficking. So this just puts that, if you can't prove the human trafficking, you're still protecting that victim. And finally, it will increase the grid for trafficking of a minor from a B grid to an A grid. Just again, making sure that we're holding these traffickers accountable. These bills are going to allow for tougher punishments and will also tell the victims that when they come forward to tell us about this crime, they don't have to worry that their trafficker is just going to get out on probation and can retaliate against them or can exploit another vulnerable individual. Senate Bills 522 and 523 would amend the MCL 712A 19B and 72263, or 722 638, to specify that human trafficking offenses will trigger the MDHHS to petition the family court regarding parental rights. That's something that currently is not in the statute. So what this means is that if a parent either labor traffics or sex traffics their minor child, MDHHS would have to petition to the family courts and the family courts would still have to follow the due process requirements. So there would still be hearings that would be required. The petition would have to have probable cause that trafficking did occur. And then there would be a two-part hearing. So the first hearing would be the jurisdiction hearing to determine whether or not a crime was committed, that there was trafficking. That can either be determined by the judge or the jury based upon what the parents choose. If they choose a jury, it'll be a jury. If they choose a judge, it'll be a judge who makes that determination after hearing testimony and seeing the evidence. Then, if there's a finding that human trafficking did occur, there's a second hearing to determine whether or not there's a reasonable likelihood that the child would be harmed if returned to the parent's care. So there's that two-part hearing that would still take place. That isn't getting changed. And Senate Bill 524 would amend the different statutes regarding commercial sex, which is always linked to human trafficking. So that one's a little bit, there's a lot of different MCLs inside of that bill. So what it first does is it's going to amend several of the statutes, 750, 448, 449, and 450, which are the solicitation, the what I like to call the Johns statute, right? The people who are going and purchasing the commercial sex. So what that does is it changes the age from 16 to 18 so that it makes it so it's not okay that you engage in commercial sex with a 16-year-old, and 16-year-olds can't be charged with this crime, right? Because they are a child. In fact, there's a presumption, which we'll talk about in a minute, that any child and under the age of 18 is presumed to be a victim of coercion or trafficking. So this will really protect that vulnerable subset of youth that kind of gets overlooked because they're still very young and they still need the protection, but they're over the age of 16. And instead of criminally punishing these children, we should be looking into why this is happening to them and making sure that they are safe and making sure that this does not happen to them again in the future. So this is a way to do that. This also will amend 750451 in several ways. So the first is that it's going to add the MCL 454, which is the one that deals with landlords and leasing of spaces that are used to engage in commercial sex. It's going to add it to the same kind of punishment structure that the solicitation would be. And I say that because currently the punishment for renting a space that is going to be, that you know is going to be used for commercial sex is just a $750 fine or a 6-month misdemeanor. It also will change the age from 16 to 18 in Section 451. When I was talking about that tiered, the amendment for putting in 454, I'm like really mixing up these numbers today. This statute or this bill is going to amend those statutes that I previously talked about to have it be more of a tiered. It's kind of already a tiered, but we want to make sure that we're heightening the penalty for individuals who have already been convicted of purchasing sex but just continue to do it and disregard it because the penalty isn't significant enough. So what will happen is just very similar to drinking and driving offenses. So the first offense would be a 93-day misdemeanor, but instead of a $500 fine, we would ask for a $1,000 fine. The other thing that we have put into this is a program that you can get this deferred. You can get a deferred sentence where it's off your record and you won't have a conviction if you take a human trafficking awareness program. So that way individuals who are purchasing commercial sex become aware of what human trafficking is, and that just purchasing commercial sex doesn't mean that you're just purchasing from a willing participant. It's teaching you that that participant is more than likely going to be a human trafficking victim. So it makes the person more aware that what they are doing is not a victimless crime, that they are actually perpetuating human trafficking in the state of Michigan. The second time that a person is found purchasing commercial sex, it would be a 1-year misdemeanor with an increased fine of $2,000. Because at that point, they've already learned that you're engaging in human trafficking, and they have already been warned. The third time, and from third time and beyond, you'd have an increased penalty of 5 years. So that's up from the 2-year high court misdemeanor to a 5-year felony and a $4,000 fine. And again, this is just because you have already been warned, you've already had the opportunity to learn about what it is you are actually engaging in, and you've blatantly disregarded that and disregarded the human being that you had you engaged in commercial sex with. The amendment for 750451 is also going to change the penalty for violations of 449A2, and that is that subset that I talked about earlier where it currently is a 5-year felony, and that's where you're engaging in commercial sex with a minor who is the ages of 16 to 17. So what that will do is it's going to take the penalty from a 5-year to a 20-year offense and a $100,000 fine. That puts it in the same it's the same as the child sexually abusive activity crimes, which you can use in similar situations, so that it matches that, and it matches human trafficking. And really what this is, if you want to think about like who is this going to be? Who's the victim in this crime? What are they going to look like? This is going to catch your runaways, right? The individuals who are running, they're incredibly vulnerable, and individuals are manipulating and exploiting that vulnerability. And so this is going to further protect them and hold people accountable who are exploiting our most vulnerable young children who are the runaways. Additionally, this amendment is going to eliminate the requirement that a minor caught engaging in commercial sex cooperate with services in order for that minor to receive the benefit of a presumption that they are engaging in commercial sex because they are being coerced and or trafficked. So currently, there's a presumption in the law that if somebody is a minor and they're engaging in commercial sex, there's this presumption that they are not willingly engaging in commercial sex. They don't have the intention to engage in commercial sex. They are a victim and they have been coerced. And they get to maintain that presumption, but they have to cooperate. So that's what the law currently says. We want to eliminate that cooperation because the important part of here is that a victim is a victim regardless of whether or not they do what we want them to do, right? They're still going to be a victim. And so we want to recognize that, and that's what eliminating that requirement will do. Finally, Senate Bill 524 will amend the code that I talked about previously where the individuals who provide the shelter for the commercial sex, right? These are the hotels, these are the landlords that are leasing the spaces for people to engage in commercial sex. So this is moving it from its simple 6-month misdemeanor, $750 fine, which I think we can all agree is not a significant fine for somebody who is profiting off of human trafficking. And it's gonna put it into that other category with the tiered offenses. And what this is going to do is it's going to give landlords and hotels and other individuals who are renting out this space an an opportunity to learn about what they're really doing, right? Because they're still going to have that opportunity to learn about human trafficking, and that what they're engaging in is allowing human trafficking to thrive. And if they choose to modify their behaviors, we'll never see them again, right? They're not going to get a second offense or a third offense. But if they choose to continue forward for business, then they're going to have those other, that tiered level as well, and it's going to increase from just getting a $750 fine every time that they get caught. So what it's going to do is it's going to put pressure on landlords and hotels who let trafficking go unchecked in their buildings, and it's going to stop providing those spaces for traffickers to exploit their vulnerable victims. The department believes these bills are necessary to combat human trafficking by prosecuting those who perpetrate these offenses. Coupled with House Bills 5009 to 5028, these packages will ensure that Michigan is not friendly to traffickers and stands ready to protect victims and survivors of human trafficking. Thank you again for letting me testify today.
Thank you so much, both for the work that you do to hold folks accountable, and also to also spread awareness, which I know is a really critical part of your job and something that we have to keep doing, because I think every time I hear you talk, I learn something new too. And so making sure that folks in our community understand what human trafficking really is and who it is that we're talking about is so important. I did have a question. Actually, two questions maybe. So you mentioned there's this piece right now around the minors, and there's the presumption that if they are engaged in prostitution, they are a victim. It's great that we have that presumption, but they have to, right now they're required to cooperate. How many people do we think we're missing? You know, like how many people is that, because of that requirement, are we then actually like, we're missing an opportunity to get them the help that they need? If we have a way to calculate that?
I don't think we have a way to really quantify that. I think I have not encountered really where a child chooses not to cooperate and the prosecution is then like, well, then I'm going to charge you. I have not ever encountered that. But there is the ability that that could happen, right, with that if the child chooses not to cooperate with services. Now, I mean, we want children to cooperate with services because we want to make sure that they're not going back to their exploiters, to their traffickers. So we want to have those services, but we want it to be on their terms because we can't force a person, and that includes a child, right? We can't force them to do something that just because we think that's what we want. We want them to be able to feel like the services are available to them, are open to them, so that they can choose to do them. And they're taking back that power of choice. Because, you know, with trafficking offenses, they've never had the power of choice. So what we're really doing is we're enabling them to take back their power of choice, and that will lead to them wanting to get the services and feeling comfortable doing so and not feeling forced or pressured to do that.
Thank you. That's super helpful.